Welcome to the Shema podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
I have someone very special with me today, and the way I want to introduce him is by talking about Parsha Yisro. Yisro was a remarkable individual. He was an advisor to Pharaoh, and the thing about Yisro is he was willing to leave the most prominent, prosperous, decadent society, having this top role, this very, comfortable, I'm sure, well-paid position, and when he saw it wasn't truth, he left. And Yisro is someone that always was pursuing truth. Most people go through life just accepting things the way they were taught. They accept whatever religion they were born into, whatever beliefs, habits, things just the way they are. They just go with the flow. They don't stop and question it. Yisro was different. He had something very special about him. And so he left Egypt and he went to Midian. And there he prospered once again. He pursued every type of idolatry possible, but he was pursuing truth. And when he saw that one idol wasn't right, he left it. And he went to another idol. And when he saw that wasn't true, he left that as well. And after the miracles and the 10 plagues in Egypt and the splitting of the Red Sea, all the nations knew about it. They heard about it and they were talking about it nonstop. But over time, they stopped talking about it a little less. The conversation became a little more mundane until they weren't talking about it at all. Yisro was different. When he heard it and he knew this is truth, this is the creator, this is the one that controls everything, he immediately took action. He changed himself and he went out to meet his son-in-law Moshe and daughter Zipporah and united with the Jewish people. And the reason this is such a fitting story is that person sitting across from me right now is, to me, the modern-day Yisro. So I want to introduce my dear friend, Rod Bryant. How are you?
And I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. I'm honored that you would do this.
I've been looking forward to doing this for quite some time. I had the thought in my head over a month ago when I was reading Yisro. I was like, I got to interview Rod. It's going to be amazing. So I want you to tell your story, if you would.
Yeah, sounds good. First of all, I've had an infinity toward this great hero of biblical faith. I know a lot of people talk about Abraham and all of the accomplishments. Obviously, he's the father of a nation and of nations, but Yitro stands out as a man who pursued truth to its ultimate level. And look, there are some people in the world who cannot pursue it. They don't have maybe the psychological strength or the endurance to do it. I was raised up Christianity. I know what it was like to go to church 3 or 4 times a week. And I came to Houston to college, Bible college. And immediately, because I think it was the way I was raised, critical thinking was not something that was encouraged in Bible school. It's just not encouraged at all. So I came in like thinking, how could this be true? Some of the things they would say. And you would ask a question, and then they would give some sort of roundabout explanation, quoting tons of verses. And then when you go confirm the verses, you go, this still doesn't add up. I continue to do that. I went to seminary because my goal was to get my master's divinity and then go to military to be a chaplain. And during that period, I figured I'm going to learn everything I need to learn about the Bible in seminary, and that is actually not the truth. Seminary, equivalent of seminary level, master's level, Old Testament studies, as they would call it in Christianity, what we'd call Tanakh studies, is who wrote it, when, where, and how, and about the time period. That was just about it. They didn't get into, critical textual. They couldn't. And obviously now I know why they couldn't do that, because if you go and get into the text, it would completely transform your thinking about your own religion, about what you do believe. And so that carried on. I came to Houston, went to work for the Houston Police Department. I decided I'm out. I'm not going to be involved with this anymore. Judaism was nowhere in my repertoire of thinking, nowhere. I started a small Bible study in my house with my kids and a couple of neighbors. And just out of the purpose of I've got to have some kind of constructive process for my children to learn. And within about, 3 months, we were running 25, 30 people in my living room in Huffman, Texas. So I said, well, let's move out of that, go to a hotel. And it went from a hotel to another building, eventually within 6 years, grown to almost 600 people. And at that point, I really was dragging a burden because you got to remember the truth seeker hadn't disappeared. And the success in, quote, Christian ministry had not tampered that at all. If anything, now it was more because I'm saying I'm responsible for these people. Like, I decided and I told the congregation we're going to do a year's worth of church history. And we're going to start from postmodern era and go all the way back to the very original. What is the most authentic is what I want to be. And they're like, oh, yay. They're all great. And we do that. And we uncovered the good, bad, and the ugly. And there's a lot of all of that. We get back to the Roman Catholic Church and how it was started. And then finding out that the only archaeology of anything with Christians is the Byzantine era, which totally blows this whole idea that they existed in the 2nd century or 1st century. The Byzantine area is around 280, somewhere around there. So many years after that. And then when we find out from, factual intellectuals who, one I know very well is Roman Catholic, and he says, no, Roman Catholic Church is universal church. This what and Constantine wanted was to pull all the religions into one. So whether you worship the deity Helen or whatever, if you worship Mithra, if you're Christian, we're going to put them all together and make them all dovetail. A little bit of Jewish, a little bit of everything. And once I found that out, it wrecked my world. Because then I realized there's nothing authentic in Christianity that brings us back to the ancient scriptures. So I took a Hebrew course from Hebrew University, started reading, and my whole world crumbled. Now, remember, all of my budget, all of my finances, all of my everything I got from being a pastor and making significantly good money for a congregation that size. I was starting to see that to where the scales completely fell off my eyes. And I spent 2 weeks in Hawaii. And my son had a military operation or whatever. And so he said, hey, would you mind sitting the dog for me? He had a Sheltie. I said, great. I'm going to use that opportunity to take all of Rabbi Tovia Singer's material and disprove him. So this is what I decided to do, is to get all of Rabbi Tovia Singer's works and study him and prove him wrong. Because I was right at that point where I was ready to jump in the pool. It was like either he's completely right and I am completely wrong, or he's completely wrong and I'm completely right. You can't dovetail Christianity and Judaism together. They just don't work.
So you've seen his videos before.
Oh, yeah. I'd watched him plenty of videos before.
And you were approaching it from
critical thinking. He wasn't going to sell me because he sounded like a good apologetic argument. I wanted facts. Just give me the facts. That's what I want. And bottom line, Christianity depends on an individual's religious experience or emotional experience to validate their truth. Their truth is validated by their experience. Well, I felt good. I felt joy. I felt happy. All of these anecdotal evidence that their religion is right is not based on any facts. And so they are their own test audience, right? So when you talk about facts, most Christians will go, you'll show them something very factual. And they'll go, well, but I just know what JC did for me. How can I beat that? Can't do it. But it was Rabbi Singer's teaching. Spent 2 weeks. I went to the beach one time, spent the rest in the house and reading this material, writing notes. Finally called 2 of my staff pastors and said, oh boy, we have some talking to do. It went downhill from there. I mean, downhill. It still took about, that was 2009, 8. So it took 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 before I left.
So I've always wondered how the written Torah by itself doesn't make a lot of sense. You have to go to the oral Torah. And so the oral Torah is where everything that
it fills in the blanks.
It fills in the blanks, but it also discounts everything Christianity teaches. Absolutely. Yet they took the New Testament, they plugged it in to the quote-unquote Old Testament. Right. So how, when you were studying quote-unquote the Old Testament, how does a Christian even make sense of it?
Well, they don't. What they end up doing is, because it doesn't make sense, they say this must be some mystical, allegorical thing that points us to JC. Just about everywhere. I mean, they see JC all through the Tanakh. And that's what they do, is they'll make something an allegory. And they don't say it didn't happen, but it becomes the reason why it's written was to point down the road to their religion. That's the whole concept. With that being said, people will believe something and told we shouldn't challenge it, because if we do, our faith is being challenged. Right. But see, in Judaism, our faith isn't our religion. Our faith is our relationship and connection to the Creator.
We have a totally different definition of faith.
Totally different definition of faith.
The idea of just believing in God without evidence, to us, we're forbidden to do that. The Talmud says you're not allowed to do that.
And it is Hashem himself who says, know that I'm God, not feel that I'm God, think that I'm God. That was the other thing, is slowly I began pulling back the covers and seeing that there is a completely different psychological, ethical, moral construct than Christianity had. Even though we have goodness and people in charity and all the plenty of fantastic Christians, I realized that here you have God not saying have faith in me, but know me. Because how can I have faith in something I don't know? Because faith in Judaism is not believing something you don't know, or believing something you don't agree with. But God forbid that we would ever believe something we don't believe or hasn't been proven to us, because we know how those arguments work. I've even told people that attend our community, we're not here to hear anybody's opinions about anything. We only want to know what Hashem and the sages of blessed memory say. That's what we're interested in. And see, that's the clarity that I never had as a Christian pastor. Never had that opportunity, because how do you go back and make that kind of a statement when you have commentators from every denomination saying that completely opposite thing from each other? You have the New Testament completely contradicts things that are found in the Tanakh. And when you see that their Bibles have somewhere around 40,000 different variances. 40,000. Could you imagine if we had 2 variances in the Torah, what that would cause a problem in? It'd be difficult. It'd be a huge problem. So this whole adventure, as I say, was a journey to not only completely knowing Hashem as he reveals himself, because that's another concept that's different. Christianity says I need to accept somebody to save me. In Judaism, it says I need to know God so I can know what to do to have salvation and to have life. And it's clearly God gives us a choice. Choose life or death. What do you want? And you get to choose it. And Hashem walks with us no matter what you choose. But my encouragement, if somebody's listening to this, whether you're Jewish and thinking about returning, or you're non-Jewish, because plenty of non-Jews listen to these podcasts, carefully consider the value of truth in your life. And when I have people say, all I want to know is to know the truth, I warn them, because truth comes with immense responsibility. You can't say that and then ignore what Hashem says. You can't say it without being a miserable person. And I've known people that have went from Christianity to agnostic or atheism because they were not ready to accept what the truth said. They would almost rather discount it all than to accept that. It's unfortunate.
And I am very empathetic. Growing up a very secular Jew, discovering Torah was actually true at the age of 40. When I finally realized I had to acquiesce to the countless numbers of logical arguments for the truth of Torah, I was eating my breakfast, which was a plate of bacon, and I realized bacon goes. It's very challenging. So, right. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast. It's really geared towards Baal Teshuvahs, B'nai Noachs, because I think now more than ever, people want to know the truth.
Absolutely. And we're so close to the final redemption. We're so close. I'm so excited about it. And I know that somebody listening to this might not be particularly religious, might discount it as fanaticism. But too many things have happened in this country and the world that I have seen personally with my own eyes. Once again, completely theoretical, based on my opinion, which doesn't mean anything. But the whole point is I'm seeing firsthand how many people are coming out of Christianity to embrace Torah Judaism for the non-Jew. It's a huge number. And that's why now in Israel, some of the rabbis that sort of been knowing about this are now going, oh, goodness, we got to put some order to this. Like, we have to figure out, how do we start an organization that puts order to all this? We can't have these people all over the world accepting upon themselves Torah without giving them some instruction. It's a big thing right now. It had gotten to the point, I went and visited my rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Abraham ben Yaakov. and spent 2 weeks there in the Haredi community. It was a beautiful experience, right? And going to daven, it was incredible. And I got home. When I got home, it was like, I'm pulling the plug on this. Like, I can't do it. So I announced to the staff, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to retire. All of you know that I've been on a journey. And by then, I'd already changed my eating habits, and my beard had been growing out for 4 years. And I realized, look, these people didn't sign up to see a pastor become an Orthodox Jew. It wasn't fair to them. I mean, honestly. And look, I look back on it, and I feel bad that it happened the way it did, because there were a lot of very good people who showed my wife and I tremendous amount of love and respect that we didn't even get an opportunity to make a final goodbye. It was that drastic. Okay, I'll explain to you. I call it the left foot of fellowship instead of the right hand of fellowship. So what happened? I decided to retire. Announced the pastors. I said, "Look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to take senior position as a pastor. You're going to take an admin pastor's position." But they were like, "Oh, we agree with it. It's a great idea. I think it's best for you." Yes.
How big was the church? If you had that many?
About 600. We had 13 staff members and 5 pastors. So it wasn't tiny. 54-acre campus in Kingwood off of North Park, and $6 million worth of assets, and 1.5 in the bank. I was leaving them quite well. I go to the board, and we have a big dinner, wine together, and everybody on the board said, this is good for you. I think it's good. We agree with that. We'll get with you on your retirement package. I said, great. So the next morning, one of the other board members come up to me and said, "Hey, we were just talking after you left, and we decided you can go ahead and retire, and then we'll get with you later." I went, "No, that's not how it's going to work." And so I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." Then the vice president of the board took me out to lunch and said, "Look, go ahead and resign. I'll make sure it gets taken care of." I said, "So you're executive member of your own energy business, and let's say that you wanted to retire. And they say, go ahead and retire. We'll catch up with you later on." I said, "What would you do?" And he just stared straight. I said, "I didn't think so. It's not going to happen." So that upset him, because here he's got plenty of money, could probably buy me, plenty of money. And he ended up hiring a big-time attorney in Dallas, nonprofit attorney. And they brought him down, and he went through all the records trying to find something, maybe a misappropriation of funds, or slipped up buying stuff personal from my credit card. You name it. They tried everything. They spent about $10,000 on this. And finally they called me in. They sent me a final contract. I said, "It's great." I go into the board meeting, and basically they slid a piece of paper over and said, "Read this." And basically it said, according to this particular bylaw in the Constitution, bylaws and Constitution, you are now no longer the head of the board as the president of the board. Now, it was a loophole I didn't know was in there. So if they take me off as president, by default, I'm no longer the pastor. And so I said, "You guys can't do that. I mean, you realize how wrong this is?" And he goes, "No, you have to deal with it." I said, "Whatever happened to due process?" For example, they were supposed to send a letter out to 5 anonymous pastors who didn't have any relationship with me, to set on a council to judge whether they could do that. They bypassed the whole thing. I finally asked around the table, "So personally, what did I do to deserve this?" 2 of them were silent. One got up and walked out of the room. One guy says, "Well, you haven't updated the website lately." And so the other guy, who was a little peeved at me, the executive, said, "I want to know, what is the name of God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?" And I said, "Well, I can't really say his name, but it's the sacred name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei." And he slammed his hand down on the desk. He goes, "No, it's not. It's JC." And I just stood up, because I knew the fight's over, right? Yeah. There's no way getting past this. I got up, walked out. They locked the door behind me, called the deputy, and made sure I wouldn't come get my stuff. They kept my stuff in my office without being able to pick it up for a while. Then they put it on the curb. There were about maybe 5 people that were not part of the church that was coming to my Wednesday night Parsha study. And there were 3 or 4 people from the congregation that were in that. But by then I was already like a heretic. People had already figured that out. And we went to Homewood Suites and started a meeting there. Rabbi Greenbaum, I think, came in. Rabbi Abraham Yaakov came in like pretty soon after that to kind of give us encouragement. We had about 10. And the community has grown. We've moved into this building, and we'll average on high holy days, 75 or so. And we have online teaching. The people that are here would consider themselves, if this makes sense, from Noahide. and meaning that they carry levels of integrity and holiness to a place that's not expected of them. They dress modestly. They, in all the cases, would never eat like seafood and shrimp and bacon. They just don't do it. Not because they feel obligated, because they want to be enjoined with their brothers in the Jewish world. You understand? They want to be part of the family.
So when did you sort of understand this idea of B'nai Noach?
When I left, I had no idea what a B'nai Noach was. Just if someone had said Noahide, I would have thought something you cover furniture with. I'm serious. So what's a Noahide? So I had the guy in Dallas called me and said, "Hey, I'm coming through Houston. Let's talk." He's from the Noahide community, and it was sort of a split off from Vendell Jones, one of the first big Noahide guys from 20 years ago. His wife still lives up in Waco area or West Texas. But Vendell was a very, I would call it a 20th century Noahide to the hilt. He helped to sort of get it started, but it never really went too well. But the story behind this guy, for example, when he was living in Israel during the 6-Day War, his color blindness was such a way that he could spot the enemy's camouflage. So he would tell them where the enemies looked. They'd fly on a plane, and he wasn't even in the military, right? He was a Noahide living in Israel, a Ger Toshav, I guess what you call him, in the land of Israel. But the last thing that I ever knew about him is they held a conference in Dallas back in 2010 or something like that. He said, "Hey, let me tell you about the Noahidism." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't want a thing. I'm tired of isms. I don't want an ism, right?" I just extricated myself from the worst experience of my life. It felt like I had been in a bad marriage so long that I was psychologically just beat down, and I just needed to be spiritually revived. So getting in another ism was not exciting. But my intention was to convert. So my intention was, as soon as I left, I'd already been in contact with Rob Wolbe and Rob Winder. So we'd already started this discussion. And so it's going to be a matter of moving downtown. Well, by the time 5 months went by, we were already holding 30, 35 people. I'm like, now what am I going to do? I'm going to abandon them to go downtown. And a lot of them was like, so you're going to move? How are we going to do class? They was almost feeling jaded because now I'm going to pack up and leave them. I didn't, obviously. I'm still here. But the community's grown, and I was not comfortable with being called a Noahide because I don't like titles. I don't know what it is. You understand? It's the same thing in the world of Judaism, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Neo-Orthodox.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't like any of those titles.
I don't like them.
I like just a list of responsibilities. One has 613, one has 7
right.
plus.
And I wasn't comfortable with it. And I told Ray Patterson, is the guy from Noahide, that I really wasn't comfortable. And I'll talk to him about it later on. Still plan on converting. And I ended up getting a speaking engagement first at Rabbi Jacobian's Torah V'Chesed. And I was supposed to speak there about B'nai Noach and what did it mean. And so as I began to explain it to him, I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty big. Think about it. A guy who was a pastor 3 years ago is now speaking in a shul about the pious of the nations and the Jews' responsibility to be priest to the nations. I told everyone their responsibility, the Cohen are supposed to be your priest. Right. You are supposed to be my priest. That's huge. So it took me a few years to realize I felt my need to convert was simply because I wanted to punch the card. Just want to punch the card and say, I've done it. I've arrived. But what brought me through this is when I was speaking, I spoke at a shul in Queens. And so this guy wanted me to meet this very special chacham in the neighborhood, right? Everybody respects him. Older guy, visited, was very uncomfortable because I didn't know the guy. And he asked a few questions. What are you? I said, I'm a Noahide, I've accepted Sheva Mitzvot. And he said, it's really good. He says, what do you do? I told him about the center. And he stood up. I'm like, oh, okay, it's over. And he come around and give me a huge hug, but it was one of those hugs where you're off balance, and because I wasn't prepared for that. Right. And he pulled me in tight, and he held on for a long, uncomfortable time, like what's going on? Then he kissed me on the cheeks, both cheeks, and says, will you give me a bracha? And I went, Rabbi, please. You understand? It's so humbling. I didn't even know how to explain it. So he said, no, you need to do this. As much for you as it is for me. Okay, so I do it. Then after he gives me a bracha, And he walks me to the porch, and I go to live, and he gives me another big hug, another big kiss. He says, are you familiar with Hashem planting divine sparks in the nations, and they're being gathered in the time of the nations? I said, yes, sir. He goes, you're one of those. He said, quit trying to be something other than what you are. And I didn't take his rejection. I took it as full acceptance from a very wise rabbi in New York, in Queens, to say, be comfortable with who you are.
So people who are listening may not even know some of these terms, like what is B'nai Noach?
First of all, the descendants of Noah is every human being. The Jewish people are our brothers, our elder brothers, and they were given the responsibility to be priests to the nations. I mentioned that already. Noah, when he came in, he had a son by the name of Shem. Shem took on the oral Torah that Noah knew, going all the way back to Adam. And it was Shem who was called Malek Tzaddik, that lived in what is now known as the holy city of Jerusalem, and he was a king priest, Malek Tzaddik. It is he that Abraham went to and studied to understand the full concepts of the laws that were passed down from Adam. And it is then at that point where God says to Abraham, you've done all of my Torahs. It's like, that's incredible concept. Wait, Sinai didn't take place yet. What did he have? So he had this amazing oral Torah. And then we understand that Yaakov, after him presenting the sacrifice, his son on the altar, he leaves Isaac. I'm sorry, did I say Yaakov? I said Isaac. Isaac goes and visits his stepbrother and stepmother, and then goes to Shem and spends a huge amount of time studying there as well. All of them, everybody lived by that divine code. And that common law is 7 laws that are found within the Torah. People that are considered by the normative Jewish world, there are 2 concepts that are floated out. One is that every human being is a B'nai Noach, and technically that's the truth. But what's happened in the postmodern era is those who leave paganism and separate themselves from shituf, that is, other types of practices that replace God. Once they leave that, to be called B'nai Noach is being called a goy to some. Because I feel like, no, I'm not part of the nations anymore. I'm like Yitro. I'm like, yes, I'm from the nations, but I'm with the people of Israel. You understand the struggle they have in their mind. Yeah. But technically, every human being that lives has to follow the 7 laws that was given to Noah. And those 7 laws are connected, rooted, and probably, well, actually, I would say rooted in 613. Let me explain to you why. If I were to go and understand, for example, I've made this argument before with Rabbi, says, well, you only need to study the 7. And I said, for example, if I'm told to stay away from sexual immorality, how would I know what that means? If I don't know.
Especially if you watch TV, right. You'll have no idea.
I have no idea. You have to hear Hashem say, this cannot be done with this. You can't do this. I mean, you have to know. So all of the pursuit of learning and study, even though the average person in the nations are not required by Hashem to study the Torah, just not required. And that's why so many wonderful people in the world have no idea they're B'nai Noach. They have no clue. They believe in one God. They don't practice sexual morality. They don't torture animals and take off their limbs and eat them. I mean, they're good people. And they're going to be so surprised when Mashiach comes and he's going to tell them who they are. It's going to shock some people. And also, look, for my Christian friends, no way am I condemning them for not knowing what I know. You're only going to be responsible for what you know.
Exactly. There's an idea in Judaism that some Jews are considered like captive children. If a child is taken captive by a non-Jew and brought up in that environment, they're not judged as someone who knows. So we know many people today where they were like captive children. They don't know. And
I would also say to the non-Jew who feels this spark to want to study Torah, they're probably captive child. They don't know, and they're struggling now. Well, I can't convert because I've got children, my wife, you just name it, and that's all right.
Right. We have this idea of labels, and it makes us feel a sense of belonging. My wife she was not Jewish, And when we got married, and I was not religious, and when we got married, she forgot to include in the prospectus that she was a truth seeker. She was looking for spirituality and then starts asking me about Judaism. And she takes me to a basic Judaism class and ends up going through a conversion when I intentionally did not want to marry a Jew.
Which is funny because you marry a woman who's not Jewish who brings you back home.
Oh, totally. So, which is beautiful. However, what we learned as we progressed in our studies, we realized that what her conversion was actually to at that particular synagogue, where they taught that Torah wasn't actually true, they didn't teach about the 613 mitzvot, that what she actually converted to was a B'nai Noach. Because when she was asking about, when we were learning about all the mitzvot, I was like, well, I'm bound to this. I can't turn on light switches on Shabbos. But she was like, I didn't even know about this when I converted. I feel cheated. They didn't disclose this. I was like, then if that wasn't in the contractual arrangement you made, then you're not responsible. Right. I think there's an idea, too, like, well, if I don't have a label, then I'm not included and loved by a group of people, which is not true. Now we are moving forward in that process. She wants to convert, and so does my daughter, and actually take on the 613, but it's not a sense of, it's just taking on different responsibilities, taking on a different role. And I see it like if you look at any type of business organization, the CEO of the company, he created the company. It was his ideas. You sort of think about it as Hashem and His Torah. But even he knows the organization wouldn't exist if we didn't have me on sales and marketing. We didn't have the traders. We didn't have the personal compliance. Everyone is needed to make this organization run. One person's not better than the other, and that's the same way I see the B'nai Mitzvah versus the B'nai Noach.
Absolutely, and you're 100% right. And so with that being said, coming to full reality of who you are, and I said this, and I say it today a lot, don't be you Jewish, be Jewish. Be who you are.
Love it.
Be who Hashem made you to be. And look, we talked before we did the podcast. Would I want to convert if I had that opportunity right now? Yes. But at the same time, now I'm wondering if it was meant to be, Hashem would have already given me that opportunity. You see what I'm saying? And so there's that other part that says, well, I still have a responsibility to my service to Hashem and what I'm doing as a community. Nobody is doing this. Right. Nobody is doing what we're doing here. And this is with rabbinical oversight, rabbis teaching every other week here. So these people here have left Christianity. We have had 8 people, I think, convert. And we have 2 more in the chute right now. The B'nai Tshuva that have been connected with you guys. With all of that being said, we have this huge obligation. And I realize that Jews don't proselytize, but this is not, I hope that Jews don't confuse not proselytizing by not telling anybody the truth, because they need to know. They need to know. No,
exactly. And talking to people about God and God being one and why He created us is not proselytizing.
Right. I'm going to tell the audience what Rabbi Yacobian and the Beis Din would say. If you come cold to me, or especially them, and say, hey, I just left Christianity a year ago or 6 months ago, I don't want to convert, they'd go, well, why don't you go be a part of the Nativ for at least a year or 2, and we'll visit that again. Because most people are only doing it because they want a community.
They want a community, and they're unhappy with the church. Matter of fact, at several times at the Sunday class around the corner here at that synagogue, I've had people come in and say they wanted to convert, and I've actually have pushed them, directed them over to you as well.
My thing is, I don't want to make people Nativites or Noahites or Noahides. That's not my goal. My goal is put the information out there so that a person can make a logical, intellectual decision to know God and to also strip the shackles of false religion. I mean, it's such a burden. And especially now we have the Torah, and we have the great writings of the sages, and we have the 13 principles of faith, and you have Likutei Moharan, you have all these wonderful books of wisdom, and we're walking around broken because we just don't know. And that's why I think that redemption is going to be so sweet to so many people. There are going to be people who've struggled their entire life with the mess that their lives have created and not realizing it was right there in front of them the whole time. And we have a merciful God who, if they're not Jewish or based on what they know, they'll be judged.
You know, there was Perkei Avot we studied not too long ago, and what I loved about it was, I can't remember which one it was, but the message was that no one knows exactly where they would have ended up. Like a great sage would never know where they would end up if they had been born into someone else's situation. Absolutely no idea.
Right.
So that's why even, Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not worthy, because if someone else had been put in my situation they would have done way better than me. So you never know. You may see this pious rabbi who has lived a totally observant lifestyle, knows vast knowledge of Torah, perfect midot, and you may see someone might look like somewhat of a loser without a job and is very ignorant, but the path that person traveled may have been way greater.
See, that is a philosophical, theological thing that other religions just don't have, that I know of, especially Christianity, have that built in, and where the Creator, a great rabbi, like you said, perfect in every way, who may experience some level of shame and soul correction because there were things that could have been very easy for him to do that he didn't do, as well as the guy who is the, quote, maybe ignorant guy, homeless guy. He has struggled so much with drug addiction, mental health problems, but yet he manages to give charity. That's huge. And Hashem gives him great credit for that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, the Talmud talks about someone who was born as a thief his entire life. His father was a thief. He burrows into a home. He sees the money, but he sees someone's there and realizes that moment, if I'm going to get that money, this is probably the biggest heist of my life, I'm going to have to harm that person. That's his piece of free will, and he says no. So even though he goes back to thievery, that moment, that free will choice for him was huge.
Like for us, we wouldn't. It's like no credit to me that I go to Hashem in the divine court and go, well, I never murdered anybody. You didn't have it in you.
You were never raised like that. It's like Rabbi R.A. Wolbe talks about. He doesn't get credit for never eating a bacon cheeseburger because he's never been exposed to it.
So if you when you say that, what would I say to people that are listening that first are not Jewish, that are pursuing truth, and they're listening to your podcast, or listen to all these podcasts? What is the most important thing for them to be doing right now? I would say, don't obsess about what you should do. Do what you're supposed to do now. Just perfect what you're supposed to do now. What Hashem has expected you to do. If you're non-Jew, the Sheva Mitzvot, obviously. Character development, developing your character. Working out the levels of charity that you give for the sake of your own community. And don't worry about, should I convert, should I not convert? Do I find a local Jewish community to accept me? When all those things are supposed to happen, they will happen at the right time. It just happened at the right time. Other than that, study Torah.
Can you state your website and what you do here and the online teaching you do, so if someone wanted to find and search that out, they could?
The website is netiv.net. It's netiv.net. We have a YouTube channel. It's called Netiv Online. It's just one word. All of our lectures are on that. The guest rabbis are there. What Netiv has started doing is teaching practical Torah values to the non-Jewish world. We avoid specific halakhic studies because they don't really apply. However, if we come across verses within the parsha that relates to a halakha, we'll say, well, this is where this halakha come from. It's a general education to say, oh, well, that's why they don't do this, or that's why the Jews do that. We also work very hard in the study of the parsha to connect the Sheva Mitzvot within the context of that. It's not always about that. But, for example, laws of nidah, which is purity for a woman, doesn't have any application to a non-Jewish woman. But at the same time, there are concepts of purity that are ethereal ideas that we should understand that if we're going to approach Hashem, then psychologically they could work on purities of their mind, purities of their action. And these are huge, valuable lessons, and it has nothing to do with them needing to go to a mikveh.
Yeah, the idea is separation.
Separation.
That's just great marital advice.
Absolutely. You said something a while ago, and I wanted to throw this in. When you talked about obligations, and you mentioned the CEO of a company, et cetera, et cetera. I try to explain this to individuals here that, for example, I was in the military, and if you came into the military as an officer, your obligations are completely different than the enlisted guy. Even though you both carry the same responsibilities as a common soldier, your responsibilities are different than the enlisted guys. And the enlisted guy has responsibilities that the officer doesn't have. And it's about distinction. And so when I understood, wow, for the first time, this has been 2 years ago, that when Hashem says, be holy as I am holy, I'm thinking, how is that possible? Like, how is that possible to be holy as his holiness is at such a level that word is not very explanatory. But then I realized, hold on a second. God is distinct. He's distinct. There is no other God. He is so distinct that nothing can contribute to him or take away from him. And if he's distinct, and now we know that his people are a chosen nation, distinct, then even within the nation are distinct individuals. The Kohanim, the Levites, the people. There are distinctions. Even the tribes had their own distinctions. And so with that being said, the B'nai Noach can stand in distinction away from the rest of the nations because they've become cognizant of God, they've been cognizant of the law, and they live by that. And that makes them distinct. So they are just as holy as a Kohen, but they don't have the same responsibilities. And that's the beautiful thing. When we find out when Hashem calls us and we stand before a court, if you've lived up to your fullest potential of who you are, then you've done your job, or at least tried. And this is another thing about Judaism, I even get credit if I try and if I can't make it. That's huge.
You can even pray for the desire to pursue a path. There's not a lot we have to do. All he's wanting to do is give us pleasure. He's just trying to give us that opportunity to feel like we're worthy of it.
Absolutely. One last thing is the Jewish community in Houston is a very unique group. I'm not sure if it's a Southern thing, but they're just good quality people within the Jewish community. And I realize that not every community is perfect, but the Beis Din here and the rabbis here have thrown open their arms to this community. And for them, for example, in December, actually it was on January 1st, I think, we stood before Beis Din and we declared ourselves as being rejecting Shituf and idolatry, and as that document that we have really makes those group of people kosher in the Jewish community because they understand we know what we are supposed to do. Right. Does that make sense? And it doesn't mean that I can go to Crown Heights and just insert myself there without having to do it again there. You have to have a local Beis Din every time you go to a place. But these people felt for the first time like, wow, I'm a part of the people. Even though we have distinctions that are different, I'm part of the people. And my prayer is that the people that you reach that are Jewish, it's time to step up. Because I don't like to say this because we know the truth of the matter. Hashem needs you. All right? We can't contribute in everything, but you understand he doesn't give things without us at least pushing the buggy. Every great miraculous thing that happened in the scriptures, from Sinai to the Shekinah of Hashem in the temple, all started with their hands, all started with their feet.
All the world is dependent on the Jewish people getting their act together.
God willing, soon and very soon.
Rod, I appreciate you being here and wish you continued prosperity and good health for you and your family and growth and continued success in what you're doing here for everyone that comes in these doors.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking donate in the top right corner of the page. And if you would like to get in contact with our host with comments, suggestions for future topics of learning, or questions for him or his guest rabbis, you may email him at president@torchweb.org.